Time to go.
This has to be my most favorite part of the movie. Time to pack it up. There's going to be a fight. I don't want to break my instrument. And then running out. So good. Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Cinema Psych Podcast, the podcast where psychology meets film. I am your host, Dr. Alex Swan, and today we are discussing a really influential movie, which is really good, and directed by someone who has directed some of the best movies in American film history. We are talking The Color Purple. Whoopi Goldberg's introduction into film, big star, big star, and Steven Spielberg's 1985 classic. In the middle of his career, right? He had stuff prior to this. He had stuff after this. Never on my radar, though. I never thought about this movie until watching it for this podcast. And I made a wrong choice. I made the wrong choice, y'all. So what is this movie about? It is about a Southern woman who struggles to find who she is in the turn of the 20th century, early 20th century, Georgian, Southern, traditional, religious, both upbringing and later in life, and all kinds of abuse. I'm talking specifically of Celie, Miss Celie, played by Whoopi Goldberg. The film says it is introducing her, so I can imagine that this is like her big major film breakthrough. The funny thing is like she was just 2 years later, she was Guinan on Star Trek: The Next Generation. Like, that's crazy to me. That's crazy. Other people in this movie, though, Danny Glover and Oprah Winfrey, as well as Margaret Avery and Willard E. Pugh, and a few others here and there that you probably saw throughout, the 70s, 80s, and 90s in big and small pictures. But Danny Glover, Whoopi Goldberg, and Oprah Winfrey are pretty much the faces and the people that you remember from this movie. Now, this movie is based on the book by Alice Walker. Alice Walker won the Pulitzer Prize for this story. And we follow the character of Celie Johnson when she is a teenager and she has two children by who we think is her father. And then she gets married off that same year to Danny Glover's character, who for the longest time, we only know his name as Mr. because he is incredibly abusive towards Celie. And we'll get into that in this particular episode. So stick around. We're talking The Color Purple. My guest host today is friend of the show, Dr. Wynn Goodfriend. She is a professor of psychology at Buena Vista University in Iowa. This is her 6th appearance on the show, hence friend of the show. Wynn, how are things going since we last spoke, which was last year?
Hi, Alex. Thank you so much for having me back. I'm so excited to be here for time number 6. Am I the winner? Is this the most times?
This is the most times, and you've been the winner for a long time now.
Oh, I feel so special. Thank you so much for having me
Of
back.
course, your perspective on these films and psychology is invaluable to this show.
I'm very competitive, so this means a lot to me.
Excellent. So, what have you been up to since we last spoke?
Well, I've had several projects going in addition to, of course, my classes. I will share with this audience two about which I'm particularly excited. One is that you and I share that we have projects with a company called The Great Courses. So you recently had your docuseries
Yep.
released on cognitive biases
Yeah.
with The Great Courses. And so I'm currently working with that company on my own docuseries.
I'm excited for this.
My project is on the psychology of cults and cult manipulation.
So
So
good.
I feel like I need to really articulate the word cult because people think sometimes I'm saying colt like a baby horse, but it's cults like Jim Jones'
Yeah.
crazy group cult. So Cult, C-U-L-T. So it's going to be 12 episodes about famous cults and psychological manipulation of cults. So I'm really excited about that.
That's awesome. I can't wait to consume this one because I've been wanting to put more cult stuff into my classes, but not really a good place to start. And so I think I'm going to use this as a jumping off point to include some of the really good stuff. Because the great thing about the Great Courses is that the audience is a general audience, and so you're not speaking to psychology students or even or other psychology professionals. You're speaking to people who have maybe never taken a psych class in their lives, and they're like, "Oh, cults are cool. I'll watch this thing," and you basically have to explain everything from fresh, right? From a completely novice standpoint. So it challenges us as writers to produce the kind of the kind of language that everyone can latch onto and understand. So I think it's great, and I'm looking forward to it. And what's the other thing?
And the other thing is recently released book on the psychology of the very popular show Stranger Things. So I
Nice.
have just one chapter in that book. I didn't write the whole book or anything, but I'm excited about that book because my chapter is about friendship theory. So the psychology of friendships and sort of the rules of friendships and how do friendships develop. And I'm excited about that particular book because all of the profits of the book go to a charity that helps find lost children, which is one of the themes of the show.
And was there any particular reason you chose Stranger Things? Was it like a write a chapter on friendship or write a chapter on Stranger Things?
It's actually one in a series of books about psychology in popular culture.
Gotcha,
And so the editor of the series gets to choose sort of the particular topic. And so he chose Stranger Things.
Gotcha.
And then I've written in maybe 2/3 of the books in the series.
Oh, yes. I think I remember you talking to us about some of the other chapters you've had in other books previously. So now my question then is for the Stranger Things, were you taking a look at the friendship across all of the seasons that have been released so far, or just a set of them?
All of the episodes so far. So everything except for what will be the last season.
Yeah. And focusing on the core friend group of the 4 D&D friends from the original.
Yep.
Okay, excellent. I love that. They're such a great group of friends, and they have conflict like real friend groups do,
Absolutely. And they kind of grow up over the season,
and we get to watch them do
they
that.
kind of go through adolescence and they have conflict because, girls come and sexuality kind of gets a little mixed up in there. And so we talk about that in the chapter.
Excellent. Well, check that out, listener, because if you like Stranger Things, it'll be a groovy time. And the other thing that I noticed that you were doing since the last time we spoke is you've been a world traveler. A little bit of living vicariously through you, since I can't do that right now. And so, what were some of the highlights from the trips that you've taken recently?
Well, I'm trying to kind of make up for COVID
Sure.
since couldn't travel then. I am a big traveler. That's probably my main hobby. I like to try to go to a different country every year. So
Wow.
most recently, I was in Belgium
Hmm.
for a conference over spring break. Coming up in just a few weeks, I will be taking 12 students from my university to Spain.
Hmm.
We're going to do a 3-week language immersion class. I would really like to learn Spanish. So
Wow.
we'll be sort of doing 4 hours of Spanish every day and then sort of touring around Spain.
Hmm.
Then I'm spending a week in Ireland later in the year, and then I'm going to spend a week in Greece.
Doing anything in particular in Greece? The sightseeing or the lounging
Mm.
around the Aegean Sea?
The second one, my husband and I both have a sabbatical in the fall,
Uh-huh.
and so we are going to be doing work
Yeah.
because of sabbatical, but we will also be doing some lounging. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, I hope the Aegean is nice and crisp for you when you're out there. So let's get to the film today, right? The Color Purple. So recently, and as you've mentioned in your other previous appearances on the show, that you regularly teach on rotation psych and film. And I was watching very closely this last time that you taught it. I think it was in the fall, correct?
Yep.
And so I was looking back through, and I wanted you have you back on the show. And I was looking back through of the movies that you'd done. Of course, some of the ones were on the on previous shows that we've had, you and I. Also, some that have been with other guests as well. So I was looking for maybe something a little bit new, a little bit different than we've discussed before. And I saw The Color Purple. And I had heard about this movie, and to the listeners, I'm just going to repeat myself here. I slept on this movie. Did not really knew it existed. Kinda knew that there was this movie from the 80s that was pretty much had no major white actors in it, and it was a story about the rural South. But that was about it. Didn't realize that it was Whoopi Goldberg's essentially big breakout role. Didn't realize that Oprah Winfrey was in it, and definitely didn't realize that Danny Glover played a real bad man. A real bad man. So I saw that, and it's got very understated poster to it. It's just Whoopi's character sitting in a window reading a letter. And it's a silhouette, and it's just like, what is this movie about? Usually posters kind of tell you what the movie's about. No idea. So I saw that, and I asked you about this. So my question for you, Wind, is, since we sort of chose this movie together, it was in your second film class. So just to give us a little taste before we jump into a discussion of the movie in general, what makes you put this in your second film class? What is the impetus for including it in this class?
So let me answer that kind of two different ways.
Okay.
One is I love the book, The Color Purple. So the book is a feminist classic. I'm also, in addition to teaching psychology classes, I'm the director of the gender studies program on my campus. And so, I try to make my students aware of the history of feminism and these feminist classic novels and art and things like that.
Yeah.
You mentioned the cover of the poster of the movie. And it's also a scene in the movie, right, where we see Whoopi Goldberg's sort of silhouette. And that was because that was the book cover.
Gotcha. Okay.
So that's why that sort of iconic image it was used for the movie poster, was because that was the original book cover.
So they wanted to grab audiences that way.
Right.
Okay.
So this book is in the top 100 banned books of all time, and
What?
and it's really controversial. And I mentioned that partially just to kind of give context for the importance of The Color Purple as both a book and as a movie. But also because I know that my mom is listening to this podcast, and my mom is kind of a badass, if I'm allowed to say that word. And
course.
she runs a banned books club, and
Love
she
it.
is going to be talking about The Color Purple next month, actually.
Awesome.
So
Perfect timing
so
for
she's
the
gonna
release
have
of this episode. Yep. Love
exactly,
it.
yeah. So I think she's gonna have her club listen to this podcast. So anyway, back to
No
why I
pressure
choose it
for
for
me.
back to why I have my students watch the movie. So I choose movies. I think I've mentioned this before. I choose movies that I think my students haven't already seen and that are important either for a psychological purpose and or for sort of a history of film
Okay.
purpose. So like they were directed by Stanley Kubrick or something like that. And this film was directed by Spielberg, right? And so that it was his first film that wasn't like a summer blockbuster like E.T.
Yeah.
And the choice of him as a director was controversial because a lot of people said it should be a director of color. And he was kind of hesitant to take it on. He actually, I believe, waived his fee and did it for sort of union minimum, which was like way less than he normally would have gotten.
Especially at that time, mid 80s. Yeah, definitely.
So it's important for lots of reasons. But as you have already mentioned, it was really kind of the breakout film for many of the actors. And so for one reason, I show it to my students because it's important for sort of a history of film perspective.
Yeah.
But also, of course, the psychological content of
Yeah.
it. So my students are from the rural Midwest. And so many of them are from kind of rural, relatively white towns. And so I like to sort of expose them to other ideas. And so I think it's important also for us to just acknowledge that I'm a white person. As far as I know, you identify as a white person.
I'm a white person, yeah, through and through.
Yeah. And so I think it's important for us to just acknowledge that, our discussion and analysis of The Color Purple is definitely going to be sort of influenced by that. And it's important for us to just say, certainly two white people talking about The Color Purple, have to just say our view is certainly missing something than if we had, people of color who could potentially be involved in the conversation.
Yeah. And that's a great positionality statement here too. And the other thing that I want to add is that this is a feminist book, and of course men can be feminists. I consider myself one. But the vast majority of the story focuses on women. And that's another thing that I cannot empathize with. I can obviously sympathize with the women of the story because they're treated very poorly, especially by the men in the story. So I think it's important for me to add that bit to this. And in the spirit of that, and the spirit of Wind sort of taking this as a teaching tool, this film as a teaching tool, I will be here to listen and to ask questions. And that's going to be my role in this conversation. And I think that's a good place to start. So you mentioned controversy, and I want to talk about a little bit of the controversy right at the top here. This is a phenomenal film. It's so well acted. We don't know who Whoopi Goldberg was before this, right? We kind of had an idea of who Danny Glover was. I mean, he was already in Lethal Weapon and in previous stuff in the 1970s. So he was already a pretty big name. And of course, he was probably the splashed name right at the top for all of the advertising that went into this. Besides, this film is directed by Steven Spielberg, with Don LaFontaine doing "In a World" kind of trailers that used to be the case, right? But then Oprah, not a real big name at the time,
right?
And you get like 5 seconds total of Lawrence Fishburne, and he says like a total of
Right.
3 words or whatever.
Back when he was Larry Fishburne.
Larry Fishburne. Oh my. I did not know he went by Larry.
Oh yeah, that's in the credits. He's Larry.
That's so good. Oh my goodness. But so we have all of these newcomers, and it's a great film. Everyone thinks so. Gets nominated for the Academy Awards and all of the
11 Academy Awards.
11. So all of the big categories plus like costume design and editing and best screenplay, adapted screenplay, of course. And it wins none of them.
Right. So this is controversial for so many reasons, right? One is it holds the record. I think maybe it's tied with one other film, but it holds the record for the most Academy Award nominations without winning any.
Oh my
So
goodness.
11 nominations, 0 wins. It, as you said, it was in pretty much all of the major categories except for Best Director. Spielberg was not nominated for Best Director.
Interesting.
Which was controversial in and of itself, right?
Yeah, I'd say so.
I don't know if that was some sort of punishment to him for taking on the film, right? Or I don't know. That's weird. But it was an example at the time of, African American people not getting acknowledgement for doing really well. And so, that has been a problem with the Academy Awards forever.
Yeah.
And it was controversial because this film and the book have been hated on by kind of everyone. So in some ways, it seems like, okay, like maybe white people don't like it, but also some African American people don't like it. So when this film premiered, the NAACP picketed the premiere of the film because they perceived that it portrayed African American people in a negative light. So it's kind of like you can't win in some ways.
Yeah.
And so the controversy of this, book and film, I feel is a really important reason why it's such a conversation piece, and why Alice Walker, who was the author of the original book, why she was saying, we need to be talking about these issues. We need to be talking about the subjugation of women and the fact that we have all of these issues that are addressed in the book and in the movie, because we're not talking about them. We're not doing anything about them.
And generations of people are losing that history, right? We talk about this a lot in classes like history of psych, where it's always surprising to students that psychology used to be, and especially mental health treatment used to be so barbaric. And it's just like, well, we need to keep talking about it, and we need to keep referencing it and portraying it and showing people that it didn't used to be all of sunshine and daisies with the medication stuff and other more humane treatments that we have now. People did some gnarly stuff. And so, I mean, it sounds like that story from Alice Walker's perspective needed to be told. And somebody in Hollywood was like, we need to make a movie out of this.
So when I teach this film in class, there's we always start the class with what are the psychological topics or themes that you're going to see, and then they watch the film, and then they have to write a paper about it. So there are so many psychological topics that we could discuss for this film. So lots of themes. Really important things we could talk about are resilience in the face of trauma.
Miss Seeley.
Absolutely. Pretty much every character has some kind of trauma that they go through. Empowerment is a huge thing. We see the arc of these characters, especially, of course, the women, taking on their selves and speaking with their voices at the end and sort of making their own way. we see redemption is a really important theme, with Danny Glover's character really kind of finally sort of taking responsibility for
the do right by me or you will be cursed. I mean, I love that scene, of course, where Celie curses him to oblivion, like your life is going to be crap until you do right by me. And of course, he recognizes that he needs to do right by her. But I don't know if he truly earned that. His character. I don't know if he truly earned that.
I think that's one of the differences between sort of the book and the movie, right? In the movie, they kind of wrap that up with a pretty bow in maybe, 5 minutes.
Yeah.
In the book, it takes place over several years.
Okay. So
maybe more realistic.
Yeah,
right?
That sounds like a more realistic redemption arc than what you see in the movie. And we were talking about just a slight aside before we jump into more of the psych stuff. We were talking about before we started recording how maybe the movie was a little bit long. And it's a 2.5 hour movie. And most of that is movie. It's not even that long of credits, to be honest with you, at the end. But, it's a pretty long drama that has many pacing lulls in it. And it kind of was a bit of a bummer from a filmmaking standpoint, the rushed ending. I would have liked to have spent more time with that ending, both from Danny Glover's Albert character and then Celie meeting her kids and seeing Nettie, her sister, again for the first time in 30 something.
So I'm not sure about the pacing.
Yeah.
So the main topic that I try to hit on in class is this concept of intersectionality.
Okay.
And I'm not sure how many of my students have heard of intersectionality before I introduce it to them in the class. So intersectionality originally actually comes from a different field. It comes from legal studies.
I did not know that.
It's credited. It's credited to a woman, Professor Kimberly Crenshaw. She's an African American legal studies professor, and she came across a case where there was a woman who basically tried to get a job at a car manufacturing plant.
Okay.
And she was not hired by the plant, and she sued them for not hiring her. And she basically said, like, I didn't get the job because I'm a Black woman. And the judge said, well, you can't, like, she lost the case because the judge said they hire Black people and they hire women. And so you can't prove sexism and you can't prove racism.
Wow.
So you have no case. So the issue was this car manufacturing plant hired Black men to work in the factory, and they hired white women to work in the office, but they didn't hire Black women. But there was no legal concept for the combination of her identities.
Yeah.
So Professor Crenshaw created this concept of intersectionality, and her point was, you basically, if you don't have a name for something, you can't really do anything about it. Basically, you can't sort of have a precedent if you can't label it. So she is credited with this term intersectionality, which is the idea of the kind of coming together or crossover or overlap of your multiple identities. And we all have multiple identities, right? So I am white, I'm a woman, I identify as pansexual, I live in Iowa, I'm middle class. So all of these things are part of my identity, and how I experience the world has a combination of privilege and prejudice, or sort of discrimination and oppression, or opportunity based on the combination of those things. And so you are a white man, right? And your experience is different from both a white woman and a Black man, right? So it's the combination of these things. And so that's what intersectionality is all about, right? And so just to kind of wrap this up before we get back to the movie. The example of intersectionality that I use in my class that I think hopefully hits home with the students is everyone is familiar with the wage gap in the United States, right? So all of my students have heard the sort of statistic that for a typical job in the United States, if a man gets $1, a woman will get about 80 cents.
Yeah.
And I ask them, how much does a woman get? And they all say 80 cents. Okay. But that is the number of how much a white woman gets.
Right.
And I say, how much does a black woman get? And they all kind of stare at me. Well, the statistics show that a black woman gets 63 cents and a Latina woman gets 55 cents. So why are we not talking about those numbers? Those numbers totally suck.
Yeah.
Right? Like 55 cents, that's no good.
Yeah.
Right? So why aren't we talking about 55 cents?
Yeah.
Right? Why are we only talking about it from a white person's perspective? Yeah. So the fourth wave of feminism, which is the wave that we're in right now, is this idea of all of the history of feminism in the United States has been white feminism. And intersectionality is the idea that feminism has to be more inclusive and it has to talk about other people's perspective and other people's stories.
Right.
So I like the color purple because it features this broader perspective.
Yeah, we get to see, I'll just say three main women in that movie. Three black women who are all different people through and through. You clearly see their personalities shine through in every scene that they're in and every scene that they share. But they have a shared experience in society that nobody else in the movie can really share. So yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And just to bring some levity to this, I want to take you back to your description where you said, I live in Iowa, but you didn't say that you were an Iowan. And I thought that was funny. I'm not one of you. I just live here.
It's so funny that you actually point that out because I did not realize I said it that way. So good call on that. It's so funny because I absolutely am an Iowan. I was born here. I was raised in Iowa. I moved out of Iowa for 8 years. I went to Purdue for grad school, which is in Indiana. And then I lived in Idaho for 2 years. So I only lived in I-States.
Wow. And your brother lives in Chicago is like...
Yes.
I-States.
So it's funny though, because my entire life, people have always shown surprise that I am from Iowa because apparently my personality is not very Iowa. And so
I not having been here for that long, I agree with them.
So it's funny because I guess the culture of Iowa is like not particularly sarcastic and not particularly blunt, which I am both sarcastic and super blunt. And so sometimes on the first day of class, I ask my students, like after I've introduced myself and I've gone through the whole thing, I say, guess what state I'm from? And the modal response, the most common response is New
Jersey. Well,
and I don't know what that even means. Like, I think it just means I'm very direct and I like don't really BS, which is true.
I mean, I take that as a compliment. Being from the other coast. I mean, that was one of the biggest culture shock. Well, I'll put air quotes around that. Culture shock things that I had to grapple with because California is very different from the Midwest. So I just thought that was funny. Let's jump back into the seriousness of this movie.
Right.
So I want to focus on the intersectionality with respect to Celie, the main character. And so we're not having to do any kind of content warnings or anything like that. I'm going to dance around some of the heavier stuff in the movie. So Celie is the victim of abuse from her father. And spoiler alert, turns out wasn't actually her father, just a dude that her and her sister mother married after her father left or died or something like that, just out of the picture.
Yeah, her stepfather.
Yeah, so her stepfather ended up abusing her, and she ends up getting essentially arranged marriage off to Danny Glover's character, Albert. And I said at the top of the show that we don't even know what his name is until like halfway through the movie.
Right. She just calls
him Mr. And it's an extremely lopsided relationship, right? So we've got him as the head of household running the farm. His previous wife and mother of his children died. He has a lot of children, and he needs someone to take care of everything while he takes care of the farm. And that's how he describes it. He first wants her sister, Nettie, who is younger than her. And the stepfather of Celie and Nettie does not agree. And so Albert, Danny Glover, settles for Celie, even though he thinks she's ugly and that she's not really good for anything, and doesn't end up fathering any children with her. And essentially is there to be a housewife.
I think it's important to just note the reason he does not father children with her is because she's been abused in the past, and I think is infertile.
Okay. I wonder if that's implied in the movie.
Not because he does not have relations with her.
True. He does have a lot of relations with her. Yes.
Right. Against her
wishes. Yes, for sure.
Yeah.
So what are some of the biggest takeaways from Celie and her characterization that you want your students to grab hold of in this intersectionality?
I think it's really important to talk about one of the other controversies of the movie, again, sort of compared to the book. And I know that your podcast is not about books.
And yeah, books make movies, so go for it.
But it's an important part of the movie and how the movie was made, and Spielberg's choices, which were that in the book, her identity and her empowerment and growth are very much about her embracing her identity as a lesbian.
Gotcha.
And that's downplayed quite a bit in the movie.
There's some implications, but yeah, if you blink, you miss it.
Yeah. So they sort of have a nod to it in a very sort of G-rated way.
The movie is PG.
PG. And Spielberg actually said he purposely downplayed that aspect for two reasons. One was he did not want a PG-13 rating.
Oh.
And because he sort of chickened out, honestly. I don't think he used that phrase, but, it was the 80s. He was, trying to, keep his career going. So, and he had a lot of stuff that he was dealing with in taking this movie on, kind of sort of against some people's advice. And so one of the things that I hope my students know is that that is an important part of the original storyline.
Mm-hmm.
And it's an important part of Alice Walker's point in the original book, and it's an important part of Whoopi Goldberg's life. I mean, she identifies as gay in her real life, and I think it's an important part of fourth wave feminism to embrace the LGBTQIA2S community, and so that's, I think, something that I like to point out as something that's maybe missing in the movie that I wish.
So what does that change for Celie then in the end? Do you think that her characterization in the movie suffers from this missing piece?
In some ways, yes, and in some ways, no. Because I think that the movie still shows the importance of maybe sisterhood and sort of the friendship of women, right? We still have that. We still have the support of women. We still have that friendship piece. but it changes the relationship of Seely and Shug. They're sort of just shown to be friends.
Yeah.
And I think Shug as a character is bi or pansexual, right? Legitimately and authentically. But I do think in some ways it's kind of a cop out. It's like, Dumbledore's gay, but not really. Like, so from it's almost disappointing to the LGBTQIA community to not have better representation.
Yeah, especially in the 80s when they were struggling with representation and negative stereotypes and all sorts of bad stuff. So in the book, the relationship between Shug and Seely is a lot more than what you see in the movie. That's what you're saying.
It's more explicit.
Yeah, more explicit. Okay. And so we get there's a great scene where Seely is almost meeting Shug for the first time when she is, I guess, coming down from a lot of drugs and or alcohol or something, and she's in the bathtub naked. And she's like, "What? You've never seen a woman's body before?" And I think that wears one allusion to it, but you're right. It's sort of downplayed as like, oh, she's just a naked woman who doesn't care about having other people see her naked. But Seely is very bashful in that moment in the scene, because she likely hasn't. Other than her children.
Her entire experience is abuse.
Right. The intersectionality there of sexuality. What kinds of changes do you see in Seely's character from the beginning of the movie through to the end? What's her growth?
Well, another really important scene and change in Seely is when we see her talking to Oprah Winfrey's character, who has just married Harpo, right? And Harpo's struggling, how do I control her?
Right.
And Seely says, beat her, right? And that's such a hard scene for the audience because, Seely has been abused her entire life. Why would you wish that on someone else, right? And so that's such an important scene because it's the idea that, someone who has been abused their entire life, that's all they know. And in the book, it kind of describes, it's written from Seely's perspective, right? So the idea is she's really envious of the empowerment that she sees. And she's so envious that she kind of wants this other person to be brought down in some ways. And so in some ways it shows kind of the humanity of the character and the fact that she regrets that later and she tries to then empower others.
I think you get a full 360 moment at the very end when it's a family dinner and Shug and her new husband are leaving, and they're going to take Seely with her out of that home, and that's when the whole cursing goes on. And you get the full 360 there because Oprah Winfrey's character Sophia, yeah, thank you. I was blanking on her name.
It's okay, I was blanking too. So.
Where Sophia essentially tells Seely that she looks up to Seely and she thanks Seely for everything that she's done and all of that, even in the face of this one vulnerable mistake.
Right. And so that brings back to earlier when I was saying, there were various themes in this. Redemption is, I think, a really important theme, right?
Yeah.
Because we see the redemption of Albert And we see the redemption of Celie because Celie makes mistakes too, right?
Yeah.
Celie makes a mistake when she tells Harpo, beat your wife.
Right.
But she redeems herself because, that's all she knows. And she's envious and she makes mistakes just like everybody. And she helps Sophia in these really important ways later. And you see that regret that she has. And that's so important to Sophia later. And
Considering
again, it
that
shows
Sophia spent 8 years in jail, in prison.
right, because Miss Millie is this clueless, entitled woman who's just abusing her in this whole other way, right?
Yeah.
So I think this redemption piece is another really important theme.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, as I said, I don't know if Albert's was earned, but I do believe the connection between these three women, Shug, Celie, and Sophia, is all earned. I think Shug earns her redemption for how she entered into the picture. So for those people who are listening who haven't seen The Color Purple, Shug Avery is a jazz singer and performer and is the love of Albert's life, except that it is mostly unrequited, except for maybe a few flings here and there. But he acts in a completely different way to Shug than he does to Celie. And I think Shug, there's too many S sounds. Sophia, Celie, and Shug. Great. I think Shug recognizes that pretty immediately, even though she calls Celie ugly the first time she sees her. She's probably high or drunk or something. And Celie remembers that, by the way. And
yeah, that's hurtful.
Yeah, very, very hurtful. But recognizes how Albert treats Celie and knows that that's not an appropriate way. And so she redeems herself, Shug redeems herself by calling, at least in the movie, calling Celie her sister, writes a song about her, which I gotta say is an amazing song, and I love that they bring it back on, like, I guess gets a radio deal or something like that, because it's playing diegetically, I'm pretty sure, on a record player, on a radio somewhere at the end on Celie's new property, and it's such a great song. But essentially takes her under her wing to redeem herself for being the interloper in their relationship, even though she didn't really cause any discord because that discord was already there, but recognizes that.
Shug also stays living there longer than she originally planned to kind of protect Celie. She also helps Celie investigate the missing letters, basically, and then eventually takes Celie with her when she leaves the second time.
Yeah, and a great non-dialogue sequence where Celie is essentially getting her bearings about being in a different life than a Georgia farm and going to places like Nashville and experiencing life in the 1930s and the 1940s, which was quite different from her small farm upbringing I think the character is born in 1895 or something like that. So
yeah,
a turn of the century baby who doesn't know anything else and then gets to go out on the town.
And I think is sort of loosely based on Alice Walker's life.
Oh, okay.
The author of the book.
Okay. That's an interesting perspective too, even though Alice wrote it as a fictional story.
Yeah, I mean, I think she grew up in that part of the country and sort of, was writing about things that she had sort of heard
I see
about,
what you mean.
or
Gotcha.
That kind of thing.
I wanted to get your take before we end here. I wanted to get your take on the portrayal of the white people in the movie. There are very few of them, but I have some thoughts. And I'd like to hear your thoughts about the white folks in the movie first.
Yeah. So one of the interesting parts that I perceive about this film is that Miss Millie, who's sort of one of the only main white characters,
Speaking role, definitely, yeah.
Perceives herself to be this like white savior, basically, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we have this kind of, I don't know, trope of the white person who sort of feels like, I'm gonna save these poor people, you know, and aren't I great?
Mm-hmm.
And she even has these lines like, you know, I've gone out of my way to be nice to you people. And
Mm-hmm.
in her mind, she's like this wonderful person, but she's super condescending, right? She's super entitled. And as soon as it's inconvenient for her, she like totally goes crazy and like, you know, is very selfish. So, so her portrayal is certainly not a positive one. And I think it's fair in a lot of ways, because I think that, you know, that's a pretty standard character that probably would have been encountered by a lot of people.
I think that was, I think Millie was very accurate. A rich, ignorant person who was taught from an early age that there was a difference between white and black people, especially in Georgia. I mean, we're not too far removed from the Civil War, and we're not too far removed from slavery, and we're not too far removed from, or not at all removed at all from Jim Crow laws, especially in the state of Georgia. And so white people at the time felt empowered by all of that. And you can clearly see that in Millie. Even in this multiracial town, there was clear segregation as to where the black folks lived and we don't even see where the white folks live. We only see them in town. But I think the scene that stands out to me is when she drives Sophia to her family's house and she's saying, "Oh, you could stay there as long as you want." And then drops her off, lets her get out, and accidentally leaves the car in like reverse or whatever. But before she tries to leave, she says, "I'll be back at 5." Well, that's not get to stay as long as you want. That's you get to stay until 5.
Right.
And then she has a freak out because she can't get the car. And this is kind of funny because it's a new invention that people have, right? And they don't know how to deal with it. I thought it was kind of funny from a technological advancement point of view. She doesn't know how to do it, which also plays on the trope that women can't drive. And she's struggling to do it. And so a bunch of these family members, including Harpo and brothers and cousins and things like that, come out and try to assist her in putting the car in the right gear so she can get out of there. And she has a breakdown because all of these black people surround her and she feels like she's getting attacked and has a breakdown. And so Sophia comes out and is like, "They're just trying to help you. Calm down." And she says, you can drive with so-and-so, a man from the family. And she was like, "Nope. Can't drive alone with a black man in my car.
Yeah, I don't know him.
And then she says, "Okay, well, fine. How about a black woman from my family? I don't know her either." And it's at that point you have to recognize, as any person watching this movie, that this occurred daily in places.
And if you back up in between, she also, while she's sort of freaking out and the people are approaching the car trying to help her, she starts screaming like, "Stop attacking me."
Right, yes.
They're just trying to help her get her car in gear, right? And she perceives them to be attacking her, right? So yeah, absolutely. Like, they're just trying to help her and she's absolutely just, freaking out about it. And then she won't get in a car with someone that she doesn't know, and either that's because she's afraid of them or because she doesn't want to be seen in town, without anyone who's not her maid, right? So either way, it's bad news.
Yeah, it's bad news. There's and in the culture of the South, which is a very strong culture of honor, that would be dishonorable for Millie to be in alone in a car with a black person of that time. It would have been beneath her. And the only reason that Sophia can be in the car with her is because everyone knows that she's the maid. And so, of course, she's going to be in the car. There was another scene very early in the movie that I also want to point out as far as how white people act in this movie, which is the clerk at the general store. And this is before we get Whoopi Goldberg as an older Celie. This is still the younger actress playing a 14-year-old Celie. And she spots probably a young adult woman who has a baby, but the baby may be one of Celie's. And the clerk in this scene is casually talking to another white man at the counter, and is speaking very nicely. You can kind of hear them in the background. And then this woman is looking at fabric because she wants to make the baby some clothes. And the clerk comes over and is like, "What do you want?" And because this woman is also a black woman, and she's, "What do you want?" I'll take a yard of that. And then stares at Celie and is like, "What do you want?" And is very aggressive toward Celie and toward this other woman because of their skin color. And then goes back to very casual, nice conversation with the other white people in the store. It's very stark differences. Shared spaces, right? Because everybody has to go there to buy stuff, but very different ways of treating those customers, different customers.
Absolutely. And if that's the only store in town, like, they have no choice.
No choice.
To go there and be treated badly.
I will say there is a white character in the movie that is benign, which is not saying much because benign is not good. Benign is just there. It's meh. And that would be the postman, the mail carrier.
He's just bringing the mail.
He's just bringing the mail, and he lets people hang out on the back of his cart, and he's nonplussed, but he's still also, I mean, he's not a main character, so as if I would be expecting more from him, but at least they weren't all bad, but for a white person, Steven Spielberg did do I think right by the speaking roles of the white characters in the film by portraying them as they would have acted in that time. And that's not that's not a positive portrayal.
Right. He didn't try to put nice white people in there to defend white people or something. Right.
Yeah. Which is obviously extremely important because he will be directing Schindler's List in like 7 years, which is a completely different take, but also some white people aren't great, namely Hitler. So but also that Schindler wasn't a nice man until he was. So I think Steven Spielberg played that as well as he could, but while still only focusing on the black characters in the movie. Because I think one of the things to point out here, and correct me if I'm wrong, but if we spent too much time with white characters, it would kind of dilute the theme and the overall thrust of the story, correct?
Oh, absolutely. This is not a movie about or for white people. Like, they do not need to be there.
Exactly, right? And you see the white people with privilege in the movie, and it's very contrasted with the black folks in the movie. It's just it's two sides of a coin that still kind of exists.
Well, and so it's important to point out, like, this movie in comparison to stuff like To Kill a Mockingbird, which is super popular among white people because it shows a white person saving a black person, right? That's a white savior book and movie, right? The Help is another example of this, right? It's a white person helping black people. Hidden Figures, great movie. In some ways, it features these really smart, empowered black women working for NASA, but the Kevin Costner character is a white guy who sort of saves them in some ways, right? So you don't need to have a white person in the movie to save the black people. Like, that's not necessary.
Right.
And so I think it's important to show movies where people can save themselves.
Yeah. And I think that's what happens in this movie.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I got this. And so my last question to you is, what is meant by the color purple?
That is mentioned in the movie, but I think it's probably, again, sort of more featured in the book. And my interpretation, which I think is probably, debatable, is there's a scene where they're talking about walking through a field and seeing wildflowers. And they say it pisses God off if you walk past the color purple and don't appreciate it. So the possible interpretation of that is it's important to appreciate moments of love. It's important to think about what's good in life. If you are a person of faith, you could say it's important to think about your blessings, right? So I think that's what it means, but I also think that's just my interpretation, and there are probably other interpretations as well.
That was my interpretation. I didn't know if I missed something because there wasn't a lot of purple in the movie. And I was wondering if it was missing some thematic quality other than just what Shug says at the end there about it. And I mean, I think we could both agree that we are not people of faith, and so it's kind of hard to interpret the the religiosity of such a quote because the flower is not purple. We only see it as purple.
You're going all scientific now.
Yeah, I mean, so like the flower itself isn't that color, or the petals and all of that stuff. So it's just like, well, wait a minute, and then I can spend hours on that. But I wanted to know if there was any broader thematic quality to it, having been looking for, and maybe this is a little naivete on my part, but I was looking for more purple in the movie and see if it like made its way into different things, like maybe something that she was wearing or something that she looked at frequently, or it reminded her of Nettie, like the color itself reminded her of Nettie, or vice versa, that kind of thing. With Nettie as her sister. I know we didn't talk too much about Nettie, but I was just wondering if there was something bigger than what Shug says at the end, and if there was something broader in the book. But I mean, your interpretation works for me. I think it. If you take it at face value, if God gets pissed off if you don't look at pretty flowers that are pretty colors, then you're dumb.
And I mean, I think, from a psychology of happiness perspective, even at our worst moments, there are things that we can have gratitude for. There are things that we can appreciate about life.
Yeah.
There are moments of hope and there are moments of optimism that can take us through those bad times. So I think we can look at it in that way.
Mm-hmm.
The sort of it gets better idea,
Yeah.
I think, is important. So we can look at it in that way as well.
And that same field is at the start of the movie and at the end of the movie. So I mean, we end up in the same place that we started. So that might be a part of it as well. The color purple is very important to this particular plot of land, which then becomes important to Celie. It's the place where she sees her children. It's the place where she sees Nettie again. It's the place where she builds a new life without Albert.
Right. And it's sort of a renewal for her and sort of the circle of life and all of these important things. I think we're probably coming to the end of our time. So I'd like to mention one more thing.
Oh, yeah, sure. Go ahead.
I think is important. So we were talking about controversy earlier with the controversy of this particular film and the controversy of intersectionality.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to just say that intersectionality is still controversial. It's still considered politically divisive a little bit. And even in psychology, it is considered controversial.
I wonder who's raising that controversy. I'm curious.
Well, the reason that this is particularly salient to me is because one of the projects on which I'm working right now is a new introduction to psychology textbook.
Okay.
That will be coming out hopefully next year. It's
very cool.
Published through Sage Publications.
Mm-hmm.
And people who aren't familiar with the textbook writing process, you draft a chapter and then it goes out to people who teach the class and they give you feedback on the content and maybe you should reference this cool study or whatever. And so I wrote the social psychology chapter.
Okay.
And I mentioned intersectionality. It was basically like one paragraph about self and identity and self-esteem. And so it was sort of one of the bolded terms, intersectionality. And one of the reviewers said, I would never use this book in my class because this is liberal nonsense from some kind of feminist crazy person who is using not scientific woke BS, and it's not psychology and it's not science, and get it off my desk.
Wow. You laugh at that, but wow. I
was really angry.
Okay. That's my appropriate response there.
Yeah,
wow.
I'm sort of laughing because it's hiding my vitriol.
Seething anger? Yeah, oh my God.
So I'm reading this review and I'm just thinking like, and it's an anonymous review, right? Which is probably good. And I just think like, okay, this is such the opposite of the person that I would want to use my book and the opposite of what I would hope to portray with my book in my classes. And it's absolutely true that I am a feminist and that I believe in intersectionality and I believe, in equality and getting rid of racism and all these things. So I had a chat with my co-authors and with the editor of the book, and I said, we're a team and I can't make a decision without all of you on board, but my preferred response to this comment is to write an entire chapter called Identity and Intersectionality and to just double down on this.
Yeah, who cares about this guy? And I'm going to be bold and say this guy.
Let's do it.
Yeah.
So we are just going for it, and now there's a whole chapter about it. So take that.
Yeah, I mean, that guy should probably just stick to whatever hogwash that he's using for his intro psych tech book. I mean, the fact that people have... Was this an anonymous review?
It wasn't an anonymous review.
Oh, man.
I don't know who it was.
Anonymous reviews. I just... It's really, really something. It's really something how people could just, like, consider that okay to say just because they're anonymous. I'm willing to bet that they wouldn't have said that if their name was attached to it.
I don't know. I know that they will not use the book, and that
That's
there
their
will be
loss.
other people who will not use the book because it takes this stance, and we can't please everyone. But I think that there will be other people who choose to use the book because we do have this stance.
Yeah. I don't know if anybody should be teaching psychology if they can't put this concept together. Like if they can't, I don't. What are they? Are they teaching that it's like nature only?
Yeah, I'm not sure
Are they?
how the students feel in this person's class either.
Oh boy!
If they
Oh
feel
boy!
welcome.
That could be. That's a whole other podcast and a whole other episode. That's a whole day's worth of recording there. Oh boy! A lot to unpack. Well, I want to thank Wind Goodfriend for joining me to discuss the color purple. Wind, before we say goodbye, as always, what are the things that you'd like to plug for the listeners just one last time?
I encourage everyone to check out Stranger Things Psychology, and I would encourage everyone to go to The Great Courses to check out Alex's docuseries, and maybe next year my own.
Excellent. Well, thanks again for joining me, Wind. It was great to have you on for the 6th time. I'm sure there will be more.
I hope so.
Alrighty, and that's going to do it for this one. Thanks for listening.